20 till so that there's room for choir folks. Hi, world of the internet. So part of the hope for the next 2 weeks, both today and next Sunday, is that we'll explore a little bit of the birth narratives. You may not know that in the Gospels there are only 2 birth narratives in Gospels and 2 without. Matthew and Luke have the more familiar stories that we just saw put into the pageant, and John has its own kind of birth creation in the beginning story, but not, there's no Jesus, wise men, baby, Mary, etc. And the Gospel of Mark begins straight away with, this is the good news of Jesus, and he's an adult. And John the Baptist shows up. And so, a lot of Bible scholars think that Matthew and Luke, each in their own way, had access to these stories about Jesus' birth, and that they've written later. So the further out the Gospels get from the place that Jesus was actually living, the more the kind of stories about him build, and so the more details they put about his birth. So many people think the Gospel of Mark doesn't have a birth story because we think it's the closest one to when Jesus was actually living. And that with time and as the Christian movement grew, some people suggest that the birth stories actually came a little bit later to make sense of some of those things. And so next week we're going to focus a little bit more specifically on the differences between Luke's story and Matthew's story. We're going to separate them because for most of our lives, church has smushed them together. So we had 2 Gospels smushed together. The wise men don't show up in Luke. The shepherds only show up in Luke and not in Matthew. So looking a little bit at what that means and what each gospel writer is trying to tell us. But I thought today it would be fun, if you're game and willing to go with me here, to think about how acting these stories out impact how we understand them. So we just saw a portrayal of...
Or we will see.
Or you will see, or we've seen now a couple times with rehearsal yesterday. And every Christmas we see all of these kind of pageants or programs that act out the story. And one of the things that I've come to really love is that in acting out the stories of the Bible, you can actually learn some new meaning. So my favorite example of this is an experience I had with the Gospel of John. There's a story in John chapter 2 about a wedding in a city of Cana. And it's where Jesus turns water into wine. And in that scene, if you were to just open a Bible and say, what is that story about? Jesus and his family and other disciples are at a wedding, and they run out of wine, and Mary, Jesus' mother, plays an important role and tells the people who are the catering crew in the back, just talk to my son and listen to him. Whatever he says, that'll be good. And Jesus miraculously turns all of these jugs, they say it was like 450 gallons of water into wine. So this is not just like a couple of bottles of $3 Chuck from Trader Joe's. And at one point in the story, Jesus says to his mother, Mary, "Woman, what are you doing?" And most times, when we hear this in church, Jesus sounds a little bit like a pissed off adult child. Woman, what do you do? Right. And so I saw a performance of the gospel. There's a group that I know in South Dakota, but all across the country there are groups of biblical storytellers who act out the stories, and in acting them out over months, figure out what is the best interpretation for all these characters and all these pieces. And so I went and I saw this story, and it was Mary was played by a woman I knew, and she played Mary in the scene as totally drunk. Like she had a good time at the party, like, probably a wedding reception that you've been to and saw someone, kind of staggering up, which then put Jesus, his woman, in a different context. Now, is that biblical? Yeah. Is it an interpretation? Absolutely. Does it mean that anytime we read that story, we should presume Mary's a drunkard? No. But that was just one way of interpreting that play. interpreting that scene and story. And so I thought it'd be fun for us, if you're willing to go for it. You can live out your roles on camera. No. But I want us to play these scenes a little bit back and forth with each other, and to see what you notice. Because I think there could be some really powerful meaning as we use these stories to kind of go back and forth.
You gotta pass out those.
Yeah, and so I've got scripts for you all.
Oh, I've already got my
I need a
idea
little
of
help.
what
I need some help.
Yeah, well, and there's no right way or wrong way.
Can we improvise?
Yes, yes. There's improvisation involved, and so one of the main rules of improv, I know the type is little, I'm sorry, and this is not the translation you are used to. So this is the translation that is meant for performance. And so I want to start, we're on what's page 239, and we're going to start at verse 26, where it says, in the month, the 6th.
There you go. For a minute.
Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so I need someone to be the narrator. All right, Kathy's going to be the narrator. And who wants to be the angel Gabriel?
I'm not a good angel.
Dave, do you want to be the angel?
Sure. I'm not a very good angel.
I think you'd be a great angel. There's no wrong way or right way. And then, Chris, do you want to be Mary?
I sure do.
Okay, great. And we're going to,
Narrator will need some help.
and that's okay.
Pronunciation.
So with pronunciation, go with it.
Go with, okay.
Pretend you're reading an obituary on the radio and just give it all the confidence in the world. The names here are the Hebrew versions
Right.
of the names we know. So Eliasheva, Miriam,
Hashem.
Elohim. Hashem means the name. It's a word for Lord.
Okay.
So part of this acting out is that it's a little bit different, and so we'll see how it goes. And if we laugh and we lose our place, we'll just start over. There's no right way or wrong way. But
It'll be the blooper version.
yeah, but as we go, the hope is that we learn something. So take a moment and just think about, like, how do you want to play your character? And it does not have to be the way that you would think.
Right.
Maybe Mary. Maybe Mary
I'm trying to
is,
see where she starts speaking.
yeah. Verse 34.
Okay.
But the cool thing is, you might have interactions here if there aren't words.
Okay.
And so again, there's no right way to go, but even as the narrator, Kathy, if you want to interplay and hop in between, and we'll play around with movement a little bit too. Again, this is just a pure experiment, but it's to see what we notice about the story and how we've been socialized to see and hear it. You know, does that make sense? This is the day the pastor went rogue.
And three portions.
Okay, stand up a bit.
Oh, we're gonna get out and move around here, yeah.
Oh.
All right.
So yeah. All right. So I think Kathy, if you want to start.
Okay.
Again, and we'll play with each other. So pretend the camera's not there, other than to
Okay.
watch us go.
Okay. Yes, I have to get ready. I have to find my motivation.
That's
Be a
right.
little bit more like.
Yeah.
Oh, good, yeah. Yeah, but
There.
let there be
That's,
light.
yes. Okay.
Okay,
All right.
right.
And begin.
In the month, the 6th, the messenger Gabriel was sent from Elohim into a city of Galilee, to which the name was Nazareth, to a young woman courted by a man whom the name was Joseph. Why Joseph? Hashim will increase, whatever. You said that Hashim means the name?
Name or the Lord.
Yes, the Lord will increase, out of the house of David. The name of the young woman was Miriam, which means sea of bitterness or sorrow. When he went into her, he said, "Rejoice, favored one, Hashem is with you." Don't be afraid. Okay. this argument was.
What do you mean, the Lord is with me?
The Lord is with you.
I don't get it.
Yes, He is with
I
you.
don't get it at all. What
There- there's
do you mean the Lord is with me?
Okay, well, He's not exactly touching you, but.
That's all right.
But His Spirit is in you. Okay?
Spirit is in me.
Yes, you know, all those Sunday school classes you've been to. Remember
Well,
that?
I went on Saturday.
Oh, all those Saturday
I went
classes.
on Saturday.
All those children education classes.
Oh,
you
yeah,
went to.
yeah,
Okay.
I know.
Yeah, remember that? Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
He was a rebel there too.
he said, the messenger did to her, stop being afraid, Miriam, for you have found favor before Elohim. Look, you will conceive in your belly, and you will give birth to a son, and you will call
I
his
want
name
girls.
Joshua.
I've always wanted
They'll
girls.
come later.
Oh.
You just have to have faith.
All right. What's this?
Just hang in there. How old are you again?
Oh, I'm 12.
Oh, Lord.
Oh, my goodness.
I just
No
started
wonder
into
you're
girl-
afraid.
into womanhood like 6 months ago.
I guess. Wow. Well, you have friends though, right? And you have
Yeah, they
you
tell
have
me
your mother and your
stories.
aunts and your cousins. They,
Yeah.
Yeah. You hear stories. Okay. So, this one who will be given to you will be great. A son of the Most High he will be called.
Wow.
We will give to him, Elohim will, the throne of David, his father, and he will reign over the house of, I'm guessing this is Jacob.
It is.
Jacob
Yep.
cheats into the eon. Of his reign there will not be a completion.
Wow. What does all this mean? How will this be? Since I
know
don't
this.
fool around.
Yeah.
I don't
It doesn't
fool
seem
around. I'm
like
a
you.
good girl. My mother
There's space for
raised me.
improv, right?
There would be
My mother-
That's improv,
a
for sure.
special stone for you if you fooled around, I can tell you. So,
So how's this going to be?
yeah, so this is where the faith part comes in. And the person that has been chosen for you has been chosen correctly too. You can
Okay.
trust in that. You can
Okay,
believe in that.
all right. So am I supposed to fool around?
No,
Oh. I want to fool around. I got this guy, Joseph.
not yet.
I think he's pretty cool.
He is cool.
He is?
Yeah, but not yet. Okay, you gotta wait a little.
Come
bit.
on.
All right.
I want to fool around. Maybe I'll be 12, but I want to fool around.
All right, let's take a pause. This is good. This is a good place to break, so we can head back to our team stuff. Good job, everybody. This is exactly what I was hoping would happen. This is great. Okay, so we'll act it out again here in a little bit, but let's head back and see what we noticed.
The angel hasn't had a
Yeah,
chance.
The angel hasn't had a chance,
I
yeah.
haven't changed yet.
Yeah, why don't you pick up at 35, Dave, and talk to Mary.
Yeah. Any answer, the messenger stood, he said to her, a breath of the Holy One will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. And therefore the holy baby will be called the Son of Elohim.
Son of God?
Do you like that name?
No. I like the name. Something else. I'll think about it. I wanted
Yeah.
girls.
And, I'm still.
Yep, you're still going.
Look at Elisheba, your kinswoman, even she conceived a son in her old age.
Poor dear.
Must be rough. And this is her 6th month. She whom they call sterile, not impossible with Elohim in all words.
Look, the female slave of Hashem, let it be to me according to your word. Okay, then you send me away.
Go away.
Go away.
All right, and let's pause there, and we'll end
Yeah,
scene for
that's
now.
good.
Yep, that's a good place to go. All right, so that was awesome. That was fun, and now it's on film for all time.
Oh, dear.
You guys were
You
great.
need a disclaimer.
Yeah, right.
The improv was amazing.
It's probably, but you see, but bribable?
This is not good.
I think we can now put it on YouTube if you want, but I'm just glad to have it because I think it's fun. So what did you notice? this as you were trying to act it out?
I think Miriam is more a real person than how she's portrayed in the Gospels.
Yeah.
I mean, and in statuary. And I think
Yeah.
she wore other than blue all the time.
Yeah.
So,
I think all of the characters are real.
And these are real people.
Yeah,
it's-
yeah.
And they have feelings, emotions,
Yeah, and
and
Miriam should
reactions to life.
to get this message.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Whoa.
yeah.
I wanna, this is fun and this is good, and I'm glad we did this, but I just wanna say, all these nativity, I have to laugh at them, these crushes. I don't think there's ever such a moment at all.
Hmm. Yeah.
And, they show Joseph and Mary, hovering over this baby with halos and all this stuff. I
Yeah.
thought they were scared to death.
Yeah.
Wondering, what is really here? And I said, I choose to believe, based on nothing but my own thoughts, that, if it happened, in a manger scene, whatever, animals went around and all that, I think Mary had the help of a midwife.
Hmm.
Somebody in the community, poor Joseph,
Where
what's
they
he gonna
stand.
do?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's not said, but I bet there was somebody in the community.
Someone had to.
And so
That
he
was
said,
common practice, so.
Yeah.
there was a midwife there to help her, because Jesus, who knows if she ever witnessed a birth? Maybe she did. And poor Joseph, was he? Yeah.
Right. Well, and Joseph plays no role at all
Right.
Yeah.
in Luke's story. Have you noticed that? I mean, we aren't to the birth yet, but like the prayer of Joseph, which we see in the pageant and we see all the time, and the stoning piece, those pieces come from Matthew's gospel. And so interestingly, Luke's gospel includes more women than any other gospel.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
And
wasn't
another
aware of
thing,
that.
I want to ask of Margaret.
Oh boy.
I'm like,
I do read a lot.
how do we know all this? I mean,
Yeah.
Mary must have chatted, or her contemporaries must have chatted about all this. I mean, just the intimacy of the angel coming to her
Mhm.
and making that announcement.
Yeah.
I mean, she told somebody.
Yeah. Yep.
And they probably didn't believe her for years and years, and then somehow the story got believed.
Yeah. Well, and the,
And the angels and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and what's interesting to me is that, we don't know exactly how all of this got transmitted through centuries. We do know that the earliest gospel writers may have been younger children, adolescent ages, at the time of the resurrection. So there's a possibility that, like, Mark was a young boy
I'm
when,
meeting somebody,
yeah.
so, excuse me.
when Mark was a young boy, when he was, so he would have been coordinating with Mary. But I think what Chris said is interesting. There's good news that you can't hold it in, right? He is risen is not like super believable, but somehow it keeps spreading in Easter too. Yeah.
There's a lot more people involved, it's a whole community of people, it's like it's all like, it's melted down to a simple little thing, but actually, it's quite a,
Yeah.
it's a whole thing.
Yeah. Well, but you all embodied as we were acting out was just perfect to me because you
I had a
made,
small part.
you did, Dave, but it was great.
But it was
Um,
great.
was that you made explicit what is implicit in all of this text. And that's a very faithful thing. In Judaism, the rabbis call that midrash, pulling out what's between the words and what's in the story, And so those things to me are just fun to notice.
It's interesting, because so much is up to interpretation, and even the very birth of Jesus.
Exactly.
There's a lot lot of interpretation either around that.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
primary
Right.
thing.
Right.
It's, yeah.
I loved, how old are you? I'm about 12. I mean, that was a perfect example of like what that's supposed to be, you know?
You should ask that.
But
We all-
Yeah.
Biblically, she wasn't 12, no.
Likely 12 to 14.
12 to
Yeah, but
14.
she's not even able, 12.
She said that she had, Chris said to me that she had just recently become,
Yeah.
or something.
Yep. And
Oh.
just like
Yeah,
entered
something.
womanhood.
Entered
That's-
womanhood, yeah, so it's very
Very
early,
beginning.
yeah.
So, right, and that would have been common within the biblical era for that a woman's existence, for lots of reasons, was primarily related to fertility.
Yeah. Of course, the lifespan of people was much shorter anyway.
Correct.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
And
So
that,
the 12 may have been the equivalent of
Yes.
right.
older, you know.
And what's really interesting is that, so we believe in the creed, in what we call the virgin birth, right? It's part of the creed, right? Born of the Virgin Mary. And that historically the church has used that to talk about like not having sex.
Right,
But the word virgin actually comes from the Hebrew word for young girl.
yeah.
And it just gets translated a different way. Oh, there's sound happening. No, it's not yet. Oh, we've got about 3 minutes. But what's interesting is that the virginity piece only comes in from moving from Hebrew to Greek. So that right, and so what starts as young woman
Yeah.
becomes a virgin. So my favorite way of translating that is similar to what Chris said. To the newly menstruating Mary,
Right.
you know, or to
It's
the
a womanhood.
right, yeah. I mean, the connected to fertility,
Yeah.
and not connected to sexual activity.
Right.
You know, so that
Exactly.
it's just a. But the church for a long time has talked about Mary, you know, as an example
Yeah.
of abstinence, which is not bad. It's not particularly good. I don't think. You know, there's just it's more complicated
In
than
the
that.
Jewish community, was it pretty standard for men and women to be separate? Like at the synagogue and the temple, the women didn't go to the temple at all, right?
Well, yeah, and I think that it's hard to know for certain the kind of politics of that, but that there was definitely segregation by gender.
Because her Chris's comment about a midwife really
Yeah,
fit.
absolutely.
That's the
Yep.
case.
Yep, and I mean, think about even in the, you know, up until the 1960s and 70s and 80s, fathers weren't allowed in the delivery room, you know, those sort of things too. So it's hard to know because Judaism becomes more rigid as time develops.
Really?
So like Orthodox or Hasidic Judaism
Yeah.
may not be
What was,
the practices of earlier
Was
times.
Mary's mother in the picture?
In Catholic teaching, she is. Her name is Saint Anne.
Would she have been present?
Likely, we don't know. The Bible doesn't say anything about her,
Yeah.
so she's part of the tradition and not part of the story. But what we do know is that the betrothal piece was indeed kind of a marriage contract. So it's likely Mary is likely poor, and Joseph's not necessarily in the upper echelon of earners. So what the Bible doesn't tell us is, did Mary have a dowry?
Yeah.
If so, what? How, I mean, but that
right,
becoming pregnant would have jeopardized that for Joseph too,
exactly.
which is, and again, in the laws there, the man could have, there's a stone with your name on it, is absolutely would have been right. Yeah.
Good, that was good.
It was really fun.
I was really nervous, but I
You
got
did-
over the stage
You
fright.
did well. The last thing before we go is, so it's really interesting. Chris, it was just a one-off,
Yeah,
but you said, "Don't be afraid." She said, "I'm not afraid,"
yeah.
and I just thought that was beautiful, because ultimately, I think Mary would have been terrified, you know, afraid, all these things, these experiences. But that,
Mary was a little more
yeah, yeah.
Because at 12 in those days, you probably saw a lot of life.
Well, and also children were not valued, you know, until
Right.
that fertility. So,
That's right.
so Mary would not have grown up, you know, going to elementary school
Right.
and those
No.
pieces in the same way. But yeah, what is it that Gabriel's not saying in between? You know, what is it that it's just fascinating. So,
It is fascinating. Great idea.
so if you want to come back next week, we'll talk a little bit more regularly about these birth stories.
You were active.
But I think
Is
it's just
this, have you tried this with, like, teenagers?
not a ton.
Adolescents,
I've done it with So in my first church, I did it with some students. We did, once a month, we had kind of a family Sunday that was aimed towards non-traditional tellings of the Bible stories. And what I would do is I would narrate, and then we wouldn't practice. It was kind of cold, or we might run it through once. But a lot of the high school and middle school students would take, like, we assigned them a role. So here, Faith, why don't you be Jesus? And here, my favorite, I had strung up a blue tarp from Home Depot to be the Red Sea, and I cut it in half and I rigged it up with string, and one of the kids got to be the parter of the Red Sea. So that was my favorite. So yeah, I mean, because there are things sometimes that kids will do that act it out in ways that are really unexpected. No, but you guys did awesome. I was so pleased. So
You were a great angel.
So, I
You
don't
should
know
put
about
that
that.
on your resume.
if we had more time, I was going to make Dave be Mary
Oh.
next time.
No, no, we do
Thanks,
that.
Brian.
I don't know your name.